Okay, so this is part 2 of the video for sewing up the closet core Rika jeans. So this will cover the fly insertion and the putting together the legs and doing the waistband. If you haven't seen the first video, that shows all the construction of the pockets, the belt loops, making up the belt loops. Yeah, so that shows all the construction of that. So go back to that one if you want to go from the beginning, but otherwise if you just want the fly insertion, then this is the video you need here. Okay, so the first bit to do is to overlock just around the fly bit here of the right pant. So that's the one you've also interfaced, okay? And then it wants you to join those two together. So we're going to pin those there. Oops. Lining up your tails tack from the point in your pattern. So that side, that's it. It's there. And then just line up, you've got a notch at the top here, which I have on one side and not the other. Anyway, let's just mark that in because I haven't got one. Obviously missed that notch on there. Oh yeah, so that's those lined up at the top there. Pins halfway down, just so you get that all sat flush around there. Okay, then it's going to want you to stitch from the notch there at the top, so from that notch at the top down to the tailor's tack there, which I've marked on from my pattern, in a basting stitch, and then from there in a normal stick, back stitch there with a normal stitch and round there at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So to help get that straight, it does say in the pattern, to help get that straight along there, it's probably a good idea to draw that in. So I want it from that notch. Definitely the right one, yeah. There it is. Okay, so I'm going to do a basting stitch down to there, and then from here back stitch, normal stitch, back stitch there, and a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance round to the end here. So I'll do that, and it wants us to neaten this edge here, clip into here, and then neaten this edge here. So I'll show you how we do that next. Okay, so that's that stitched in place. So I've just base stitched down there till I've got to my tailor's tack there, and then I've just changed to a normal stitch, back stitched, and then 5/8 of an inch seam allowance round to there. So then it wants you to snip in, so from the corner of your fly extension to where your stitch line is there. Okay, so up to there. So then I need to overlock around there. It does give you alternatives in the pattern to overlocking if you haven't got an overlocker, but I'm just going to trim down and stitch that one there, and press that team towards the right and the fly extension, these pieces open. Okay, so I'll do that, and then we're going to position the zip. Okay, so I usually need to go for a smaller zip. I've had to reduce the rise in the front of my trousers, which I often do, so I have managed to reduce the length of my zip. You may find that you have a lot of your zip poking up at the top here, if you haven't gone for a shorter zip, which means you will have to pull some teeth out at the end. So if you can adjust, I prefer to just adjust mine so I won't have to pull the teeth. So you just want to make sure that you're leaving at least a 13mm gap from the bottom of the fly extension to the tab part at the bottom of the zip, the end stopper, and you just want to make sure that you're leaving 1.5cm seam allowance to put your waistband on for the top, which is the way I prefer to do it. So to make sure that my zipper pull ends up just underneath that there, like so. I'm just going to put a pin in there. Now I've got that lined up, explain the other bit to you. Okay, so ideally generally your so you've got your zip facing down, so your zipper pull is facing down, and then you want your zipper tape to be running along this center seam here, and just make sure ideally you want it is a bit accurate, but that's so it all comes together really nicely. You want to check that you are the center of your zip there, center of your zip is 13 mils away from the seam there, from your center front seam. Okay, so that's positioned correct there, so I'm just going to pin that in place down there. Go. Yeah. And I wouldn't, when pinning it in place, I wouldn't move that top zipper pull because they're quite chunky, the metal ones. I wouldn't move that down and then put that straight, otherwise when you do it up it will stick out slightly. So it's best just to accept that that tape will just curve around slightly to make room for that zipper pull at the top. Okay, so I'm going to go in with a zipper foot, I'm going to stitch that in place. Yeah, so just close to the teeth as I can. I'm just going to stitch down that edge of the zipper tape there. Okay, so we'll do that next and then I'll show you the next step. Okay, so that's stitched on there. Okay, so next it wants you just to flip that over like that. I'm just going to give that a little press along there, and then it wants you to top stitch along down that edge down there. Okay, okay, so that's where we've got to so far, so we top stitch down there. Okay, so now we're going to flip it over so that you're looking, so you've got the left side of your leg now on the top. Okay, and then that aligned up there, and now we're going to pin it to this side of the fly extension there, just making sure it's nice and flat with your center front seam, so your center front seam is basted together there. Okay, see that clearly, center front seam is basted together there, so you're just going to fold that back over, and then you're going to pin that zipper tape in place along the fly extension on the other piece. Okay, so then we're going to stitch down close to the zipper tape there, and then again a second line of stitching just to reinforce it, just to the edge of the zipper tape there, just to this fly piece, not to the jeans at all, just to that fly piece. Okay, so we'll do that and then I'll show you what's next. Okay, so just move that out of the way. Okay, so that's where we're up to at the moment. Okay, so we've stitched that side, top stitched, and then we've just done 2 rows of top stitching there. Okay, so that sits flat like that. So then we want to, with that side pressed towards the right hand side, with that side laid towards, so that side, not that side, which it will do naturally anyway, with that laid towards the right side of your pants, you're going to flip them over to the right side, like so. Okay, and then using the top stitching guide here piece, it wants you to sort of mark around here where you're going to top stitch. Now you need to just locate the bottom tab of your zip, which sometimes can be a bit of a fiddle. It's difficult to feel it. Where is it? There it is. I got it. So there's the bottom of my zip there. So sometimes it's worth, or just marking it with a pen actually. I might just mark that with a pen. So that's where the bottom of my zip is there, the stopper. So this bit. Okay, that's where that is there. So that's the bottom of that marked. And then it wants you to position this 13 mils down from there. So that will be there. Okay, so that will be there. So we just need to make sure that that aligns with that there. And we'll draw around. So lining that up with the centre front. And then we're just going to draw around there. I'm not sure that this pen is going to show up on here. Yeah, just about, I think. Okay, so just about see that. Does want to keep disappearing though. So I'm going to just draw it with a chalk. If I can see that. Okay, so I'm going to stitch around there. It's worth just putting a couple of pins in, just to hold that where you want it to be. Just about see that marking there. Hopefully it doesn't disappear anymore. Just about see it. Okay, so I'm going to stitch around. There is a line I've marked there. You probably can't see it, but I can just about see it coming around there. All right, so I'm going to stitch around there, top stitch around there, and then we're going to do the fly shield next. Okay, right, I'll go and stitch that. Okay, so that's top stitched around there. So next we want piece K. So we're going to fold that right sides together, and then it just wants you to top stitch around this lower curved edge at the bottom there. So 3/8 of an inch seam allowance on this one. I think that's what it said. Yeah, 3/8 of an inch seam allowance around the bottom there, just around that bottom curve. Okay, then we're going to trim the seam allowance down to 1/4 of an inch. I'll probably grade it a little bit, and then clip into the curve, turn it into the right way, and then it wants us to top stitch around that bottom bit. So I'll do that. I'm not quite sure why, it's all inside, but anyway, we'll do that next. Okay, so that's that stitched. Okay, and then it wants you to just top stitch around there. So I just did it in the same colour thread, not my top stitching thread, as it'll all be on the inside. So next it wants you to attach that to the fly. So aligning top of the fly shield with the waist and the folded edge of the fly shield with the finished edge of the right fly extension. So at the waist, and then lining it up with that right side. So you're aligning it at the top, and then you're aligning this edge with your finished edge of your fly extension along there. I'm just going to overlap mine slightly. A bit more room. Okay, so then you're going to want to pin it to this left piece here. So it wants you to align your edge here with your edge of your finished edge there of your fly facing along there, and then pin your fly extension piece on that side to there, and then it wants you to sew a 22 millimeter 7/8 inch 22 millimeter seam allowance. Oh, that's quite big. Okay, 22 millimeter seam allowance. I might just mark that with a pen. Some idea. That's where it finishes. That's where my fly extension finishes. Right, so I'm going to stitch that down there. 22 millimeter 7/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then we will then you just need to trim it down, and I'll overlock that edge. You can overlock it, bind it, whatever. So I'll stitch that in place and overlock those edges, and then we're just going to do a bar tack from the other side just to secure that the bottom of that fly shield. Okay, so that's that sewn on and overlocked down there. Okay, so that's sitting quite nice and flat. So next that wants to go to the right. Should go to the right, yeah. So next it wants us to do a bar tack. So I'm just going to put a pin in and make sure that is going to stay where I want it, nice and flat on that side. Turn it over here, and then we're just going to do a bar tack, which it wants us to do just at the bottom here, just to hold that fly extension piece in place. So it says about 1/2 inch 13 millimeter bar tack just along there. That might be worth just marking. Idea where that's going to go to there. Okay, so I'm going to sew a bar tack across there just to secure that fly extension in place, and when we can take the basting stitches out. Okay, so that's the bar tack sewn. Okay, so that's the bar tack sewn at the bottom there. So then you just need to remove your basting stitches from your one piece here. So then that's your basting stitches removed, and there is your fly zip. Okay, so I've just noticed actually it's the opposite way round to most of my other jeans, but that's fine, that's fine. That is correct as it shows it on the picture. Yeah, it does show it, fly shield on the right. Yeah, so it's the opposite way round, and that's fine. So that's the front of the jeans done, the fly zips in. So next it will be positioning the sewing up the inseam leg and the side seams. So yeah, so I'm just going to go and grab a coffee and then we'll get on with that. Okay, so I just realised doesn't tell you in the instructions to top stitch around this the front crotch, because it does say that the back top stitching around the back crotch seam was optional, which I did, but it doesn't say to do that, so it is best to do that now before we attach the inseam. So I've done that. Then we're just going to join them together at the inseam, so just line up your inseam, so the inseams rather, so it's just the inseam up there and down the other side. So I'm going to stitch those, so it's that, I'm doing this very well, am I? So it's the inseam there, all the way up the middle, just up one leg, around the inseam crotch seam, and then back down the other leg. So I'm going to pin those, stitch those round, I'll overlock them, and then it doesn't say, but I am going to top stitch mine like I would on some jeans. So press to the back. Yeah, so I'm going to stitch them with the machine, 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, overlock them, and then press them towards the back, and then I am going to do 2 rows of top stitching round like I would do on my jeans, so as I've done the top stitching down the centre back seam. So when I've done that, then we'll pin the side seams, stitch those. So it is worth, if you haven't, once you've done the inseam, if you haven't sort of done a toil or anything, but which I would recommend anyway, but if you haven't, then it's worth just basting those side seams before you stitch them, just so you can try them on and adjust any fit then if necessary. You can also use your darts here if you need to adjust the fit around the waist area. So yes, worth doing that before you put your waistband on. So I'm going to stitch that inseam, and then I will stitch the side seams, and then we'll attach the belt loops and put the waistband on. Okay, so that's my side seams sewn, and then it doesn't say, but I did like other jeans patterns I've done, just stitch down to where that pocket edge is, and then I just back stitch there, and then I just did a bar tack there. This one says to sew a bar tack at the end of the pocket there, but I prefer to do it, I've just decided to do it like I've done other jeans, and I just top stitch down to there and then do a bar tack at the end, because the seam's pressed towards the back, so you're catching that pocket edge in there, so that just stabilises that pocket edge. Then the belt loops that we made earlier in part 1, we just need to trim those down into 6 pieces, each at 9.5 centimetres, and then you're going to place those and just base them. I've just stitched at a centimetre seam allowance because my seam allowance is 1.5, so within the seam allowance I've just stitched those in place. So on the front there, you markings on your pattern where hopefully you put some tailor's tacks or a marking, and those line up there, and then those along the back there. Okay, so next is to put the waistband together. So you'll have one interfaced and one non-interfaced. So you'll have your back waistband, which is this one here, which you will have cut on the fold like that, and then you'll have a right front waistband and a left front waistband. So if I'll do it like that. That's probably the easiest way around to see it. Okay, so that's how it'll be. Get that one out of the way. So you'll have notches at the side seams here, where it's marked there and there and there at your side seams. Okay, so those are what you need to line up. So that one will go there, those sides together, and then that one will go there. Okay, so I've done exactly the same with that one. Obviously that's a reverse, one's the inside of the other. Now it says in the instructions to attach the interfaced waistband to be the outer waistband, but I've interfaced the wrong pieces. I've got my interfacing on the inside, but it doesn't really matter. I'm fine with that because they are different lengths, your waistbands, so your right and your left. So yeah, so they are different, specific to each side. But I think that's absolutely fine. It's not going to show. It's just the waistband support will still be there on the inside. So if you do get it around the wrong way, don't worry, it's absolutely fine. So I'm going to pin those. Like that. And then that one, that end. So we're going to stitch all these at, I think it's 1.5. Yeah, so 1 point doesn't say any difference. So 5/8 of an inch at each of those side seams on both of those sections. And then we're going to press those seams open. I'll probably trim them down a bit on the interfaced piece. And press those open, and then we're going to join the two waistband pieces together. Okay, so I've sewn those waistbands, both of those waistbands, the interfaced one and the non-interfaced one together. I've overlocked, well, I overlocked the top edge by mistake, but you need to overlock the lower edge of your inner waistband, which mine is the interfaced one, so the lower edge of your inner waistband, or you can bind it, but yeah, it's a nice finish to do. So I've just overlocked mine. So then we're going to stitch along the top of the waistband, and then I'm going to press it towards the inner waistband and then understitch that, and then we are going to attach the waistband to the trousers. Okay. Okay, so that's the waistband sewn together, and then I've understitched along, so I just understitched that seam allowance over to my inside waistband, which is the interface bit, which you would normally have on the interface bit as the outer waistband. So the next bit is to fix that to the waistline of the trousers. I'm just going to take a break first. I injured my back at the weekend and it's really quite uncomfortable today, so I think that's why I'm just making some silly mistakes with the waistband and things. So I'm just going to take a break, and then I'll come back and then we'll finish the waistband and do the hem and the buttonhole and button. Okay. Okay, so we've sewn the belt loops on there, and we've got our waist. So we've attached our waistband and understitched along there. So now it's time to just fix our waistband to the right side, match up the side seams there. So as I say, mine's the opposite way round. I've interfaced the wrong side of my waistband, but it won't matter. That notch lines up with that notch there. That notch lines up with the edge of your fly. And then around the front here. I have a notch here that joins up with that notch there. does allow, you will have extra, just it allows extra, particularly on this side, it allows extra for fitting. So I'm going to pin that all in place around there, okay, matching up those notches. I'm going to stitch around there with a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance, and then I'll show you how we'll do the edges there. And then it does suggest then to attach this side over there to stitch in the ditch, but I'm going to top stitch around my waistband. Okay. Okay, so that's the waistband stitched around, attached, okay, and then I've just trimmed down, I trimmed down my inner seam because that's where most of the bulk was, from the actual waistline seam, and then we're just going to fold that back along there. Pin that in place. Okay, and then we're going to stitch down along there. So I'm going to draw it, and the same again on this one. So this one, as I say, does allow, this side allows extra length of fit. Let's get rid of all those so I knock them all on the floor. So it can be handy sometimes if it just helps you just to draw in down there. So that is where I'm going to stitch, just down from there up to there. Okay. Actually, it does say to fold over that edge, doesn't it? So it does say trim up and fold in this edge. So I'm just going to trim that down like so. Draw that on this side. So we're going to stitch down, that'll be our stitch line along there. I'm going to turn the pins over to the other side. And what it wants us to do on this corner is just to fold that up like that. Fold that up like that, and we'll stitch up there, and then that will help fold that little corner in there. So we do exactly the same on the other side. I'll stitch those, and then we'll turn the waistband out, and then I usually tack around my waistband before I stitch it down. Okay, so that's the waistband. So it literally just folds over to the inside, and then you just that overlaps your seam allowance, and then I just tack round in the ditch of the seam, and then I'm gonna stitch all the way around the waistband here with some top stitching. Now I'll start probably by one of these back loops here, so then when that's pressed up, you won't see where I've started and stopped. Oops, let's do that again. So I'm going to start somewhere here, so that when that's turned up, you won't see where I start and stopped. That'll hide that finish there. Okay, so I'm going to stitch all the way around that, particularly as I've got my annoyingly got my interfacing on the wrong side, but I think once that's stitched down, that will be fine. So I'll do that, and then I'm gonna stitch those. So once I've stitched all around there, then I need to stitch these across here. Let's say 1/4 of an inch down from that waistband join seam, 1/4 of an inch down there, and then they'll fold up like that, and then they'll fold under like so, and then we'll top stitch around the top there. Okay, so I'm going to go and do those, and actually I won't stitch those to the top there until I've done my buttonhole. So I'll stitch those at a 1/4 inch, stitch all around the waistband, stitch those at a 1/4 inch, and then we'll do the buttonhole before I do these loops. Otherwise that one is going to get in the way of where my buttonhole foot. If you do this, but if you do that loop there, then when you go to do your buttonhole, this is going to get in the way. So so yeah, we'll do the buttonhole first. Okay, so I've stitched all the way around, and then I've stitched down 1/4 inch in along there, 1/4 inch in along there. Okay, I've sewn my buttonhole before I've put these up, and I've also turned up and tacked my hem. Okay, so I prefer to do it that way. I prefer to just overlock the hem, turn it up once so it doesn't make it so bulky, and it's a bit more fluid, particularly so it doesn't affect the sort of flow of the fabric, particularly if it's a wider hem. And if you've basted it there, then you've got something with a wide hem, you've got something you can just stitch along, follow along the edge of your basting stitches to get the hem. So then it wants us to, I need to obviously sew my button on onto there. So then it wants us to press these up towards that way. Press these up that way, and then you just want to turn under that edge and just top stitch along those edges there. So I'm going to go around and stitch those, and then stitch around my hem. I don't know whether I'll do 1 row or 2 rows around the hem, but I'll see what it looks like. And then I've just got to sew my button on, and we are done. Okay, so I'll do that next and then show you. Okay, so I stitched the hems. Okay, so I decided to do 2 rows of top stitching around the hems there, and that's the back pockets there, and the tool and the hammer loop tool pocket there, and then that's the front. Okay, so I love these wide belt loops. Nice good roomy pockets on the front as well, lots of pockets on the back, and that's the fly and my button. Okay, so I'll get some pictures of me wearing those and get the video uploaded for you guys. I hope you enjoy it, and I hope it helps someone with their sewing. If you could like the video, it just helps more people see it, and if you could subscribe, and you'll just be updated. It doesn't cost anything. It just means you'll be notified when our next monthly sew along comes out, usually on the first day of the month. Okay, thank you, bye.